Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Kibin Alleyne. We thank you for joining us. If you're asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. In the United States, approximately 21,000 stillbirths occur each year, amounting to around 65 deaths per day. This is equivalent to losing 3 entire kindergarten classes every single day. Push for Empowered Pregnancy, in collaboration with Earth Mama Organics, has launched a powerful awareness campaign titled #United We Push to shed light on this critical issue. Joining us now is the Executive Director of Push for Empowered Pregnancy, Samantha Durante Banerjee. Samantha, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me, Kibin.
Now, can you share the inspiration behind the creation of Push for Empowered Pregnancy?
Yeah, so sadly, we came to push for the worst possible reason. In 2013, I was pregnant with my first child, my daughter Alana, and I showed up at the hospital in labor 2 days before her due date after a totally normal, healthy pregnancy that I was told was textbook the entire time, only to find out she no longer had a heartbeat. And so I had to deliver her after she had died, and that is what a stillbirth is, a word I had not heard through 9 months of pregnancy, and was shocked to learn that this was actually happening, as you said, to 65 families every single day in this country, and that the rates had barely budged in decades. And so in 2021, after several years of just watching this continue to happen to other families, and particularly happening to Black and Indigenous families at twice the rate as happens to white families. It's just a bunch of us bereaved parents from across the United States got together and said, enough is enough. We've got to do something about this. Nobody else is making it a priority. By that point, we'd seen other countries start to implement some stillbirth prevention methods that were having huge positive effects. And so we said, if they can do it, why can't we? We just need to make sure that our government and public health and medical system knows that this is possible and that we are demanding change.
And I want to thank you so much for sharing your story. As mentioned, unfortunately, this is happening to so many people across the U.S. in staggering numbers. What are the key factors to contributing that contributes to this issue, particularly concerning preventable cases?
So I would say the number one thing, honestly, driving the stillbirth rate in the United States is the lack of awareness. Families like me are just being completely blindsided by this every single day. This is not something that providers are actively educating their patients about. If you don't know someone who's had a stillbirth, you probably don't even realize this is going on. There's a lot of misconceptions that this only happens to, very, very sick babies, or families, where the pregnant person has underlying medical issues or doesn't have access to care or is doing something, wrong, like drugs. And that is just simply not true. Stillbirth, 80% of stillbirths take place in pregnancies where there were no known maternal risk factors at the start of the pregnancy. And most of these babies are otherwise healthy. They're typically being caused by issues in the placenta, cord accidents, infections, issues like preeclampsia. And many of these are detectable if we only put in the time and effort to, number one, teach parents what to look for, and number two, make it a priority to catch these cases before uh, children like my daughter who fall through the cracks in otherwise, low risk pregnancy.
Now, could you explain the significance of the #United We Push awareness campaign and its goals in tackling preventable stillbirths?
Yes. So, I mean, since awareness is kind of the number one hurdle at this point in time in the U.S., the best way to get the word out is by working together. Word of mouth. We need everyone to help pitch in. And when we founded Push, working collaboratively with other organizations in the maternal health space, including not just stillbirth, but also maternal mortality and infant mortality, because these issues are very, very intimately linked. Um, has been part of our mission and a huge part of our success. And so we always say we're stronger together. And so we're trying to call everyone in. If you know anyone who is pregnant, it is absolutely critical that they get this information in front of them. So anything that you can do, and it could be as simple as just going to our website or any of our social media accounts or Earth Mamas at Push Pregnancy or pushpregnancy.org. And you could find that PSA ad there. It's under 90 seconds, and you just click share. However you think your friends and family are most likely to see it. And even just knowing that it's a possibility that this could happen to you in an otherwise, healthy, normal pregnancy helps to prevent stillbirths. Because if you don't know um, that your baby can die that late in a healthy pregnancy, you don't think to speak up about it if you notice anything different or anything concerning. And what we're always telling parents is that your baby in your body better than anyone. If anything is different, anything is concerning, you should speak up right away, because in many cases there is time to act. And if you put the call into your provider and push to be heard, which again is an issue for a lot of families. But if you know that this can happen, you're much more likely to speak up and to keep speaking up until someone hears you. And so that's the inspiration behind United We Push. Parents need reinforcement, and they need validation when they have concerns about their pregnancy. And so we want everyone to know that this is a possibility, and that if someone who is pregnant is having concerns, you should tell them, go to your provider and get checked out. There's no reason not to get checked out. That's why they're there.
Now, what is the Shine for Autumn Act, and what role does Push for Empowered Pregnancy play in advocating for this act?
So the Shine for Autumn Act is one of two federal bills that are in Congress right now, which is historic, because I think it's the first time ever that we have had two bills advocating for stillbirth prevention in different ways in Congress at the same time. So we are one of many organizations who are helping to promote these two bills. The Shine for Autumn Act is particularly focused around data collection. We have many issues with the data collection around stillbirth in this country, where they are not being reported the same way that live births are. Many times they're unreported or reported with incorrect data, and so there's things in there to try to fix that. There's also aspects of education for families and providers, and training additional perinatal pathologists, so that when there is a stillbirth, we are understanding exactly what caused it, and recording that information in a way that researchers can actually access, because that has been a huge barrier to progress in the US. The other bill is the Maternal and Child Health Stillbirth Prevention Act. And that one is specifically focused around making sure that states know that they can use their Title V funds for maternal and child health towards stillbirth prevention efforts. Because right now, the 30-page Title V Maternal and Child Health Act does not mention the word stillbirth once. And so this is to kind of remove that barrier and make sure that state Department of Health know that this is something that they can and should be prioritizing, and that they can use those funds that they get from the government for it.
How does your organization collaborate with health providers and other stakeholders to empower expecting families with essential education and equitable medical care?
So, I'm glad you mentioned equity, because that is like the number one thing that we are really devoted to a push, and I think really sets us apart from others in our field. As we know, Black moms are more than twice as likely to have a stillbirth, and this is for many of the same reasons that we see when it comes to maternal mortality and morbidity. Basically, many of these issues are related to social determinants of health and to systemic racism. And so we think it's really, really important to call that out. Number one, because again, awareness is the first step to prevention. You cannot solve a problem that you're not willing to name. And so we are doing a lot of top-down advocacy. Obviously we work directly with families to empower them with all the information that we wish someone had given us. And so we share a lot of empowered pregnancy tips and stillbirth prevention tips through our social media or at our website. And But that is just a stopgap solution. It's a band-aid on a bullet wound. What we really need is top-down systemic change that is going to close the gap. Number one, between black and white birth outcomes. If we did that, that alone would save 4,000 lives every year. And so, and in general, and for all families, we need to combat the paternalism that we often see in medicine, and particularly in obstetrics. We need to make sure that providers know that stillbirth is preventable and that there are tools out there right now that research is showing can prevent at least 1 in 4 stillbirths in the United States, including half of term stillbirths that take place at 37 weeks or later, like my daughter's. And that's a conservative number because if we look at what's going on in other countries, if we match the rates of our best international peers, we could be preventing up to 75% of US stillbirths. So there's a lot of progress to be made. And while that is very frustrating to those of us who have lost a child to this potentially preventable tragedy, it is also encouraging because it means there's a lot of low-hanging fruit. So we've been working with the NIH, the CDC, the HRSA, the Health and Services Administration, who does Title V, just trying to make sure that they are aware of what's going on in other countries, of the tools that are available, that us and many of our partner organizations are providing at very low or no cost. And most importantly, making sure that they know that parents are fed up, that it's not fair to expect us to protect our children against a risk that no one even bothers to tell us exists. Um, you know, Stillbirth right now is claiming more children's lives in the US up to age 14 than prematurity, SIDS, car accidents, drowning, guns, fire, poison, flu, and listeria combined. And just like any of those things that we are, warning parents about on the regular, there is things you can do to lower your risk. It's not always preventable because accidents happen, but there are steps you can take. And for some reason, stillbirth is one exception where no one tells you about it until it's already too late. And then parents are left, with these excruciating what ifs for the rest of their life. And we don't want that to happen to any other family. And so that's really the big message that we're going to, the powers that be in our country's medical care, to say we need better standards, and you owe this to families, to make sure that they and their providers are given every possible chance to make sure the baby gets here safely.
Now, I definitely want to highlight this because it's so important, and it's in regard to mental health. Is there, a stigma surrounding stillbirth, and what goes on for the people who had to experience that? Is there something that are there any resources available, either from the hospital or from anybody when somebody goes through something like this?
Yeah, so unfortunately, there is a huge stigma around stillbirth because, of course, this is a horrific experience and something no one wants to ever think could possibly happen to them. And so, as a result, many parents end up blaming themselves, especially because so few of us get answers. As the Shine for Autumn Act would be addressing, there are literally not enough trained perinatal pathologists in this country to examine properly every baby that's born still. So as a result, about 50% of families never get an answer. And so what that leaves you with is moms like me thinking, well, if I was healthy and my baby was healthy, and my doctors tell me they did everything they were supposed to, then that means I must have done something wrong. Like what else could it possibly be? And so the stigma is really, really difficult because there is so much guilt and shame involved, and also there's a really deep lack of understanding that stillbirth is still a birth, number one, and that these are our children, and that maybe we didn't get to know them the way that we would have liked to, but we still love them just as much as any of our other children. And I can't tell you how many families hear things like, "Oh, you just try again, you'll have another baby," as if another child could, replace the one that you lost. And so, yeah, there's a lot of trauma. And thankfully, in the last, 10 years since my loss, a really beautiful community has grown up on social media, especially on Instagram and TikTok, where families are more openly sharing about their experiences and able to find support a lot easier than they could in the past. And there's also nowadays a ton of fabulous resources. So we actually, on our website, pushpregnancy.org, have compiled a long list of resources that were handpicked by other stillbirth parents, things from books and websites and social media accounts and podcasts and films, and tailored some specifically for non-birthing partners and dads, some specifically tailored for LGBTQ families, some for families who go through terminations for medical reason, etc. Because there is a lot of support out there, and no one who goes through this has to be alone. And we think it's really critical that families also know that they're not powerless to create change in their baby's name, and that's what we do at Push every day.
Now, what are some ways PUSH advocates for reproductive justice and equitable access to reproductive health care overall?
Yeah, so again, we work really closely with our partners in the Black maternal health community, particularly the Speak Move Change Collective, which does a Black Maternal Health Week event, and also launched the first ever National Postpartum Awareness Week, which is going on this week actually right now. So head to speakmovechange.org in order to speakmovechange.net in order to register for that because it's free. And it's to shed light on a lot of the disparities and the particular challenges that families of color face to get equitable health care. We also, we work closely with March for Moms, with Melanated Moms, and many others to basically try to share knowledge between our communities. Obviously, the maternal mortality community has done an absolutely fabulous job in the last few years of making maternal mortality prevention a priority in this country, and specifically by addressing some of the systemic and structural racism that takes place in our healthcare. And so we're trying to work with them to learn from them and apply those same lessons to stillbirth prevention, because again, there's a lot of the same prevention techniques, and so we have a lot of synergy between our two communities. And the other thing we really focus on is just making sure that the voices of parents of color are heard. Unfortunately, so much of the way that our medical and public health system is set up, it's just not accessible for people to even get their voices heard. Like if you have a 9-to-5 job, you can't attend any of these NIH hearings, which take place, for 5 hours in the middle of the day. And so, you end up having a lot of voices like mine, white suburban moms who are privileged enough to have childcare, who are speaking out. And so one of the things we do at Push is really try to create opportunities where other voices can be heard, the people who are bearing the brunt of this burden, and making sure that their experiences are recorded by the people in power so that we can create large-scale systemic change that's going to benefit the most heavily burdened populations first.
Well, Samantha, I want to thank you so much for joining us, sharing your story, and talking about the work that your organization is doing to help so many people who are dealing with similar challenges. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much, and we really appreciate your help getting the word out. Again, awareness is the first step to prevention. So anyone who can help us share that PSA from our website or social media with Earth Mama Organics will be so grateful. We just want to get the word out to as many families as possible.
Thank you. We'll be right back after this.
Without BronxNet, I don't know how we'd be able to showcase the important and amazing talents that we have here at the Bronx. We've been able to feature lots of great artists, performers, people who deal with coffee and small entrepreneurship businesses, discuss controversial topics, and also be able to share the voice of residents that might not normally have access without a place like BronxNet.
Hey everyone, it's your girl Kat from the Kitty Rose Lifestyle, also from The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray every week right here at BronxNet, Saturdays at 11 p.m. Wow, 30 years. 30 years of BronxNet public access television. I'm a girl from Brooklyn and came to the Bronx 25 years ago, started my journey on BronxNet on public access television in 2016, and BronxNet is where I got my start. BronxNet, I feel like, is a home away from home. They support all of my endeavors, and I wouldn't have been able to be on any of the other channels if it wasn't for the fundamentals that I learned right here at my start here at BronxNet. So I am so appreciative. My son says I should stop telling people I'm from Brooklyn because I've been here now, Bronx Storm, for 22 years. So I'm so grateful, and I wish you much success in 30 years, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30, 30 more, because public access is necessary so that people like myself can have a voice. Yes, BronxNet, it's your girl Kat from Kitty Rose. Check me out every Saturday at 11 p.m. right here, Channel 68, The Next Chapter, where we discuss shades of gray. Mwah.
Welcome back. Black Women on Board is a compelling book exploring the impactful leadership of Black women educators within predominantly white colleges and universities in the United States. Our next guest shares a remarkable story of Dr. Claudia H. Hampton, who was the first Black woman trustee in the California State University system and later became its first woman chair. Here now is the Associate Dean of Personnel and Curriculum and Professor of History in the College of Liberal Arts at California State University, Long Beach, Dr. Donna J. Nicol. Doctor, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, can you tell us a little bit more about your book, Black Woman on Board, and how it highlights Dr. Claudia H. Hampton? What inspired you to delve into her story?
Well, I was inspired to delve into her story first because I discovered a picture of her and I didn't know who she was. And I was just amazed to see this Black woman in a digital archive with very little information about her. So I knew her name, I looked her up and saw that she was a CSU trustee. But more importantly, she was appointed by Ronald Reagan, which struck me as odd because Ronald Reagan pretty much could not stand the civil rights movement, Black people. He had a known history for speaking out against, the civil rights movement. And so I was very struck by this Black woman being appointed by this particular governor. And then as I started to get into the archives, I realized that it was more than just her being the first. She was the most probably prolific, effective, and significant trustee the board has ever had. She's the second longest serving. She served for over 20 years on the board, and she was instrumental in the implementation of affirmative action. Now, while affirmative action policy had been approved, there was very little movement in terms of implementation and enforcement until Claudia Hampton came on board. And she knew that she was the affirmative action trustee. That's how she referred to herself. And so she took on the mantle of carrying forward affirmative action to make sure that Black students and Latinx students and women had an opportunity to get a college education.
Now, in your research, you discussed Dr. Hampton's use of sly civility to advance affirmative action policies amidst resistance. Can you elaborate on what this strategy entailed and how it resonates with current challenges in educational equity?
Yeah, absolutely. So sly civility is a resistance strategy that was first coined by cultural theorist Homi Bhabha. And what he does in his book called Location of Cultures is it talks about the ways in which people who have been colonized, particularly in the case of India, people who have been colonized in their own land, were expected to adhere to white British cultural norms and values and kind of lose themselves in the process. But he further elaborates on this idea called sly civility, where the colonized enters into predominantly white spaces and they behave civilly toward the colonizer while slyly passing resources on to those other colonized people. And so Hampton talked about, I found an audio of her, a 6-hour interview that I transcribed when I first started this research, and she described this need to be a pragmatic boardsman. And she talked elaborated about how she would trade votes with these white men in order to get her ultimate goal. So let me give you an example. There was a very powerful trustee before her. His name was Charles Luckman. And Luckman had a lot of influence on the board because he designed Madison Square Garden. He was an architect, and he had a lot of prestige, and people looked up to him. And so Claudia Hampton knew she had to trade votes with Luckman in order to get the person she wanted as president of Cal State Dominguez Hills, which was the predominantly black um, CSU campus. And so she talked about, I traded votes with him. You know, if he wanted uh, an art installation to be 6 feet as opposed to 10 feet, okay, I would trade votes with him in order to get the vote for the person she wanted at Dominguez Hills. But Sly Civility, she went even further than that because she knew she was locked out of a lot of the backdoor deals. They called it the telephone network. She was locked out of that because she was a black woman, and she was just like, okay, I have to figure out a way to get access to this informal network. Otherwise, I won't be able to move my affirmative action agenda forward. And so she started cooking dinner for these white male trustees and campus presidents and built informal networks with them. She talked about in interviews, she would go have beers with them. She'd smoke a cigarette with them during breaks. She sent Christmas cards to people and to their families. She got to know the names of their wives and their children. There was this elaborate type of um, social networking on a personal level in order to disarm their racism. So she says she basically played to the gender norm of the day by being a hostess in order for them to not um, demonize her or exclude her because she was black. Whereas the white women on the board had much harder time getting things through because they believed the righteousness of their cause was was the only thing that was important. Hampton knew she had to be very strategic. And so sly civility is the method that she used in order to make sure that there would be funding for affirmative action.
Thank you so much for sharing that history because, as you mentioned, even in your own journey, like not a lot of people know about this. But, she has such an impact on education, which kind of leads me to my next point. Your work emphasizes the pivotal role of Black women as educational leaders. Could you share some examples beyond Dr. Hampton that illustrate the broader impact and significance of Black women in higher education?
Yeah, so in fact, one of the women who helped Dr. Hampton get to the Board of Trustees is a woman named Verna Canson, and she was the West Coast Regional Director of the NAACP. She was not an educator, but she knew that Black kids needed educational opportunities in order to have social mobility. And so she was instrumental in designing the Scholastic Olympics program through the NAACP. And so Black kids would train and compete for Scholastic Olympics, like a decathlon type of event, but around academics. And the winners would get full scholarships to the college and universities of their choice. Um, there was also a woman named Eva Patterson. She was not an educator, also, but she was a lawyer who uh, helped to fight against the attacks on affirmative action that came in the 1990s. And so she filed lawsuits and injunctions against several school districts. So Black women have been playing these pivotal roles, whether in the institution or outside the institutions, because they know how important those opportunities for Black kids and youth are.
Now, as a scholar focusing on African American educational history, what are some key historical milestones or trends that have shaped the landscape of educational access for marginalized communities in the United States?
Yeah, so I think some of the most important milestones. Obviously, we talk about the Brown versus Board of Education decision as being pivotal, but we always kind of mislinking the Brown decision to the Little Rock Nine in 1957, which were the 9 African American kids who wanted to help make sure that the Brown decision was enforced. So we kind of sometimes miss, we talk about the lawsuit, but we kind of miss that there was activism happening after the lawsuit happened in order to make sure that this country would live up to its promise of integrated schooling. So that's one pivotal moment. Another pivotal moment is in 1972 when affirmative action was an executive order in 1965, but it did not get enforced until 1972. And that's when a number of feminist groups came together and started to press the government for enforcement rules on affirmative action. And until that happened, basically these programs languished. And so you had a lot of behind the scenes activism of women and people of color to make sure that everyone had full access to these institutions. I would say another important milestone would also be, uh, I mean, we can go back further to milestones. Even if you look at wider milestones, so things like the I'm losing
No,
it.
well, it's okay. I think it kind of just shows the fact that there's so many moments that kind of led us to where we are now. And I think that's so important to highlight. And I also want to, kind of talk about the fact that although now we are able to kind of reap the benefits of all the hard work that so many before us have, done to get us where we are, it was not without hardship. Can you just, highlight some of the challenges a lot of Black people, specifically Black women, had to face? And, how are we seeing these challenges kind of show up in the world of academia and education today?
Oh, absolutely. So I'll just give you an example from the book, because the first year that Claudia Hampton was there on the board, she didn't speak because she was trying to learn, figure things out. But when she did speak on affirmative action in her second year, one of the trustees blurted out, and I'm forewarning you, that he said, "Oh my God, there's a nigger in the woodpile." And everyone automatically turned to her and expected her to respond angrily. But because she had worked to help desegregate LA Unified School District in the K-12 level, that was her job. Previous to becoming a trustee, she knew she couldn't respond to him immediately in that moment. So she had to pull him to the side and let him know that his behavior was inappropriate. And she also enlisted the other white men on the board to go after this guy for using this kind of language against her. So that's just one example of, you know, what Black women were experiencing when they entered into these predominantly white spaces. There's so many examples of where Black women have been presumed to be incompetent, or castigated as being angry and hostile, where our language is too abrasive. The colors we wear are too loud. Our hair is too natural and kinky and coily. Just how we present ourselves in these spaces disrupts this kind of status quo, and people are very angry when we show up, particularly when we show up as uh, folks who have the same level of education and credentials and can speak about these issues. And if you want to link this to today, we see instances where Black women are being bullied in universities. We had the recent passing of Dr. Bailey at Lincoln University in Missouri, the kind of microaggressions that appear not only as faculty, but also for Black students. I work in the California State University system, and at one point we had a significantly larger Black student population. After affirmative action was um, eliminated in the state, that population went from 8% Black down to 4% and dropping. And so Black students don't have the same level of communities of support that they used to have.
Now, I understand that you were part of a documentary titled "The Big Picture: A Race for America." You know, what key insights did you share in the documentary, and how do you see media platforms contributing to broader discussions about race and education in this country?
Yeah, so the big picture documentary looked at philanthropy and how philanthropy shapes race relations in this country. And you can go all the way back to the creation of historically Black colleges and look at how um, philanthropists, usually the big capitalists like Andrew Carnegie, um, and John D. Rockefeller, poured money into the creation of some historically Black colleges with the idea of keeping Black people in the South, keeping them in the cotton industry, and keeping them subservient to white people. And so this is how you get what is called the General Education Board, which basically ordered higher education throughout the United States. The government did not U.S. government did not develop a Department of Education until the 20th century. So prior to that, they depended on these capitalists to fund these public institutions, some private as well. So if you jump forward, um, in the documentary, I specifically do my research on conservative philanthropy that had been used to get rid of Black studies programs, to get rid of women's studies programs, to get rid of affirmative action. And so the last chapter of this current book, Black Women on Board, actually uh, overlaps with the conservative philanthropy research because it was the creation of conservative media that helped to kind of catapult this anti-affirmative action fervor. So we have the culture wars of the 1990s and the creation of the racial dog whistle, where you associate welfare queen with a Black
Right.
woman, even though there are more white women who actually receive welfare benefits. And so media can unfortunately propagate these type of negative images. And there is this idea called the media loop,
Hmm.
where um, and that these are funded media loops where um, conservative foundations will write a white paper and then they will put it into a newspaper through the AP. They will clip that segment, send it to a congressperson and say, "Look, everyone is against affirmative action," even though no one actually cared about affirmative action until that moment. And
Wow.
then it will keep getting recirculated over and over and over again. And so those are some of the things that we discussed in the documentary, along with how philanthropy impacts healthcare outcomes, um, our political system. We never really focus in on the money behind the kind of media.
Well, Doctor, I want to thank you so much for joining us. Could you very quickly, because we're at the end of our segment, let people know where they can find the book?
Yes, so you can actually go directly to my website, which is www.donnajnicol.com. And if you go under the research tab, the links to purchase the book through either Amazon or through the press directly are on my website.
All right. Well, Doctor, once again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll be right back after this.
Thank you, BronxNet. Congratulations on 30 years. What an amazing accomplishment. On behalf of myself, Alleyne Dow, and I represent the Dow Twins and the Dow Twins Show, who are young producers. They are They started, I think, when they were 11, and now they're 14. They started making 30-second little fun facts, and now they are doing 30-minute shows. And it goes to a testament of how much you guys do in the Bronx to make young people want to continue to be involved. I wish you 30 more amazing years and beyond. Thank you for what you do.
"19.7% of Bronxites currently experience food insecurity. Meanwhile, instead of these nice, colorful foods, this is the best food that they have access to. If this sounds like you, there are a bunch of resources to get healthy food for free or cheap. If you want to help, you might consider donating or volunteering in one of these places. Community fridges like this one are all over the city, and allow New Yorkers to conveniently donate extra food to people who might need it. Go to this link and find your nearest one. Food banks and pop-up events like these provide millions of healthy meals to families in need. These organizations are distributing meals to Bronxites as we speak, and are always accepting donations and volunteers.
Only 57% of New York City high school students are college ready by their senior year. "55% of high school graduates either have no plans to attend college or are uncertain that they will ever attend. "34% of young adults don't go to college because they can't afford it. Discover what's possible. BronxNet's education programs, internships, and opportunities help engage and inspire Bronx youth and beyond to pursue their passions. Be a part of the BronxNet family. Whether you're interested in our shows, joining a class, or donating to support our mission, visit BronxNet.org to learn more.
Welcome back. New York State is currently considering the Packaging Reduction Recycling Infrastructure Act, which is a groundbreaking bill aimed at reducing plastic packaging by 50% over the next 12 years. This initiative not only addresses environmental concerns, but also prioritizes the safety of all New Yorkers by prohibiting harmful chemicals in food packaging. Beyond Plastics are urging businesses to phase out single-use plastics and empowering students to take the lead in combating plastic waste. Here now is community organizer at Beyond Plastics, Nyah Estevez. Nyah, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah.
Now, can you tell us about the founding and the mission of Beyond Plastics?
Yeah, so Beyond Plastics President Judith Ink served as the regional administrator for the United States Environmental Protection Agency under the Obama administration for Region 2. And during her work at the EPA, she recognized that the plastics issue wasn't getting enough attention. And so she launched Beyond Plastics, which is a nationwide project based at Bennington College in Vermont. And since then, it has grown tremendously. Our grassroots network is now over 130. We have over 130 organizations working across the United States on trying to pass plastic reduction policies.
Now, how has the project evolved since its launch in 2019? And, I want to expand on that. I feel like within the past couple of years, even 1 to 2 years, people are a little bit more aware about, or just being more environmentally conscious. So, how has the project evolved since 2019?
Yeah, we've definitely built a strong grassroots network. Like I said, we have now 130 organizations, we have multiple coalitions, and we have policy experts on our team working with companies and government agencies to pass bills like the packaging reduction bill. We also recently hired an Appalachia director working in Pennsylvania and near the Ohio River Valley to fight plastic production facilities there.
Now, what are the key components of the Packaging Reduction and Recycling Infrastructure Act being considered in New York State, and how does it align with Beyond Plastics' objectives?
The packaging bill is sponsored by Senator Pete Harckham and Assemblymember Deborah Glick. And if it's passed, the packaging reduction bill would actually be the most sweeping package reduction bill in the world. And this is because it'll cut plastic packaging by 50% in the next 12 years. It'll also remove toxic chemicals out of plastic packaging and reduce climate emissions. And this aligns with our objectives because New York is actually the 4th largest state in the country. And so if we reduce plastic packaging and cut it in half here, then hopefully it would, significantly reduce plastic waste in the entire country.
Now, how does Beyond Plastics envision engaging individuals, corporations, and governments to achieve the necessary changes to combat plastic pollution at a systemic level?
So, as I mentioned before, I'm a community organizer, so I work really closely with all of the organizations within our network. And so we really try to get people engaged with policy and actually, urge them to talk to their local officials, get involved with local government to pass bills like the packaging bill.
Now, I would love for you to elaborate on the impact of plastic pollution on wildlife, because, of course, when we talk about our food, we automatically think of ourselves as human, but how is it affecting our wildlife as well?
Yeah, so less than 6% of plastic is actually getting recycled, and so that means that 94%, they're either going to landfills or being burned in incinerators or ending up in our ocean and waterways. So, the animals in our oceans are, constantly faced with all of this plastic pollution, and this ends up, resulting in plastic being one of the largest emitters of greenhouse gas emissions. And yeah, so it's definitely a concern for our wildlife, yeah.
And how is it also affecting, we understand that it could be affecting our planet, but how is it affecting, our bodies?
Yeah, so plastic is very toxic, and plastic breaks up into microplastics and nanoplastics. And when we're exposed to these microplastics and nanoplastics, they've been detected in our bloodstream, in our lung tissue, in our hearts, and both sides of the placenta. And exposure can lead to cell damage and various cancers. So it's definitely the plastics issue is definitely a public health one.
Now, I'm curious to know, and if you're not sure, it's totally okay, but, how do we identify which plastics are, causing this? So is it like when you get meat from the grocery store, it's wrapped in plastic? Is it that, or is it our water bottles? Like, what is the culprit, I guess?
Yeah, it's definitely all of it. So any exposure to plastic will lead to, can lead to all of these detrimental effects that I've mentioned previously, especially food packaging, and that's why the packaging bill is so important. Especially when it's heated up, when plastic is heated up on food, it's easily transferable to our body. So yeah.
Now, I know for a lot of people, when we're used to doing things one way, it's hard to see a future without it. What are some alternatives that the organization has been looking at to help people kind of transition out of constantly using plastics and maybe just doing something that's a little bit more environmentally friendly, as well as friendly for our wildlife and our bodies?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to like the environmental movement in general, I think a lot of emphasis is, especially that companies put, is like very individualized. And I think that's why the packaging bill is so important, because it encourages companies to use more sustainable packaging and to move away from single-use plastics and more refillable options. And so I think we're targeting the source, we're targeting, manufacturers, we're talking about not blaming individuals, but, going to the supermarket. We don't have any control going to the supermarket and seeing, like, I don't know, an apple wrapped in plastic, but if this bill is passed, that'd be really significant. So yeah, just being more open to refill and reusing, especially like not using single-use plastic water bottles and using like refillable water bottles. Yeah.
Right. Which kind of leads to my the next thing I noticed. A lot of younger people have really gotten into using reusable bottles.
Yeah.
It's almost become trendy. I'm curious to know, like, what impact is that having on this fight to being, stepping away from plastic and being a little bit more conscious. And I've also heard people say, like, oh, if you buy too many of the bottles, you're not, doing the earth justice by doing that. So can you just elaborate on that based on like things that you've noticed as well?
Yeah, I think it's a great thing that young people are becoming more engaged, and I think the statistic that plastic is only less than 6% of plastic is getting recycled is becoming more well known. And yeah, I think it's important to encourage people to use more refillable bottles and to be more eco-conscious and to engage with bills that, will reduce plastic waste in such a significant way.
Now, can you talk about, efforts to educate and mobilize the public, especially in regions like New York State, to support measures like the packaging reduction legislation?
Yeah, so we have a lot of resources. My colleague and the National Organizing Director, Alexis Goldsmith, is leading a coalition right now called New York is Not Disposable. And it's just, it's amazing. We meet weekly. We have campaign calls just getting updates on the bill. And we've had dozens of letters to the editors published in local newspapers. We've had over 18,000 signatures on petitions in support of the bill. We do phone banking, contacting local officials to tell them about the bill and educate them. So there's a lot of different ways that we engage. We've also done in-person and virtual briefings for both organizations within New York State to get them engaged with the bill, and also for legislators to educate them on this is the bill, and this is why New York State needs it.
Now, in these conversations where we're talking about climate change and being more environmentally conscious, we often talk about how vulnerable, marginalized communities are most at risk when it comes to that. Can you just highlight, how this could be affecting marginalized communities, at a much higher rate than other communities?
Yeah, I think a big part of my job that I take seriously as a community organizer is emphasizing that the plastics issue is also an environmental justice issue. And I like to think of the plastics issue in 3 different components. So it's the production, it's the transportation of plastic, and it's also the disposal of plastic. And within all of these 3 components, there is an EJ issue because people who live below the poverty line, who researchers have found who are predominantly people of color, live within 2 miles of these facilities. And so when we're talking about communities like the Bronx, we're talking about the transportation component of plastic. So 13,000 trucks pass through Hunts Point daily. And the big part of this bill is that it will reduce the truck traffic that goes through the Bronx, which is significant because truck traffic leads to compounded air pollution. And air pollution has all of these detrimental effects to our health, such as it leads to asthma, it leads to infant mortality, and they're generational and they're very long term. So when we're thinking about the plastics issue, we definitely have to think about the communities that bear the brunt of what the plastics industry is, essentially causing, especially communities like the South Bronx.
Now, I think it's important to highlight when we talk about, climate issues and just being, like you mentioned, being more conscious about this. There is a lot of ownership on the individual to make changes, which, of course, if you can make changes, that's always welcomed, and we can definitely get into that. But, can you talk about the role of corporations and, what responsibility they have in combating plastic pollution?
Yeah, so Beyond Plastics highly encourages companies to switch from, single-use plastic packaging to more refill. And I think a silly yet thought-provoking question when it comes to accountability and oversight, especially when it comes to the packaging bill, is asking yourself, would you put the tobacco companies in charge of reducing smoking? Probably not, because their incentive is to make money. So this is really just holding companies who create extensive plastic pollution just accountable.
And as I mentioned, although for a very long time the ownership has been on individuals, I do think it's important that if people want to make these changes, that is also available to them as well. Can you just highlight some ways that people in their personal lives can be a little bit more just aware of what's going on and how they can kind of contribute to change that they want to see in regards to plastic pollution?
Yeah, I think the plastic issue is everywhere, and especially working within this plastics, anti-plastic sphere. I see it everywhere. I think if getting engaged with local organizations in your community, they are everywhere. Environmental organizations, especially in New York, there's such a great emphasis on collaborating with other people who are passionate. So getting engaged with local politics and getting familiar with who your representative is and urging them to pass eco-friendly bills such as the packaging bill is really important.
Now, what are the potential economic and environmental benefits of the Packaging Act for New York State?
Yeah, so the packaging bill, it will requires companies to pay fees to cover the waste management costs that they produce. And so this kind of eco fee means that taxpayers will actually be saving money, because right now, as taxpayers, we are currently paying for the cleanup of all of this packaging that's happening. And so the packaging bill will also require, will ensure that recycling companies don't have to bear the cost of transporting non-recyclable plastics. And so this bill requires to invest in an infrastructure that is founded on reuse, refill, like we said, and also to educate the public on both environmental protection and also plastic reduction, because the plastics issue is definitely a huge one that no one really talks about. Yeah.
Now, where can people go to learn more? Because, of course, doing this work, I've seen some of these conversations, but I haven't really seen a focus on plastic. So where can people go to learn more about this specific challenge?
Yeah, that's a great point. I think Beyond Plastics is a great organization, like leading the way. So you can go to beyondplastics.org for any information, and we have a list of things you can do, a whole bunch of fact sheets you can learn from. So yeah, it's really informative.
And upon doing this work, what do you hope to see for the future, of this effort?
I hope that this packaging bill gets passed, and I hope that people become more conscious about the ways that they interact, especially as consumers, and how we hold companies accountable. Yeah.
And, I also want to add that just having this segment right now and doing this interview, I'm thinking like, how often do I use plastic? Just thinking about, and I'm sure it probably, being a part of this work impacts the way you view the world and how often we use plastics. So, I definitely appreciate you taking the time to come out here and kind of have this conversation and open our eyes, even to people who may have identified themselves as somebody who cares about the environment and who is environmentally conscious. I think that this kind of opens a new door to you're just learning more about, how plastics are impacting our earth. So I want to say thank you so much. Yeah. Is there anything that, before we go, that you want to let people know, maybe another place that they can go look for more information or anything like that?
I just say, just check out beyondplastics.org. I think we have a great information, and check out our social media, Beyond Plastics Bennington on Instagram. So yeah, thank you so much for having me.
We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the Bronx Social Justice and Anti-Violence Forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the Recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm Kibin. Take care.